Week 9 of the NFL season is officially in the books, and let me just say this, I think this is the best week of the NFL that we've had thus far. We were spoiled with some super competitive games, and I want to talk about a couple winners and losers of Week 9. And we will begin this video off with the Philadelphia Eagles versus the Dallas Cowboys. I think this is the best place to start because truly this was probably the best game of the entire week. Not only was this a super close and classic Dallas versus Philadelphia game, but we began to see a little bit of the good things for Dallas and some of the bad things for Dallas, and a couple of the good things for Philadelphia and some of the bad things for Philadelphia. Of course, in this situation, Philadelphia is a massive winner. Currently, they have a stranglehold on not only the NFC East, but the NFC as a whole. With the Dallas Cowboys losing, I believe they are now 2.5 games above them. And this was kind of a weird game for the Philadelphia Eagles. These past couple weeks, they've really been able to flex their muscles in the run game and with A.J. Brown. And while A.J. Brown definitely had a good game, he only had 66 yards. And for the running game, they really couldn't get going, especially with DeAndre Swift. And for Philadelphia, they really have such a formula to how they do things, and it's probably the best formula in the entire NFL. They methodically move the ball down the field, attempt to try to dominate the time of possession, and they're not really going to have these games be super high scoring, even though this was a 28-23 game, just due to the fact that the Philadelphia Eagles will run the clock out on every single snap. If you guys watch the Philadelphia Eagles, just watch the play clock every single time they play. They will bleed that clock down to like 0 seconds every single time, and it's not on accident, it's on purpose. They want to slow down this game and just establish what they want to do. They don't have big chunk plays usually. Yes, they can do it with guys like Devontae Smith and Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown, but it's not really their identity. They play kind of a bully ball style, and I kind of like it. That being said, it can be a little annoying, but you get my point. And this was kind of a game where they were able to do that at certain points. Their first drive of the game where they went down and scored a touchdown, that is a vintage Philadelphia Eagles drive. And they were able to do that a couple times against a really good Dallas Cowboys defense. Now, for the loser side of things, the Dallas Cowboys, I don't really think they're big time losers this week because they honestly should have won this game. Now, both teams had 10 penalties, and I'm usually not the type of person to complain about penalties, but let's keep it a $150 with one another. The Dallas Cowboys got screwed on several calls. I didn't count every single one of them, but just on my first view of the game, I counted about 5 penalties that went against Dallas or should have been called for Dallas that honestly were just really bad calls. Off the top of my head, I think the Stephon Gilmore pass interference was a really bad call. The Luke Schoonmaker holding penalty was kind of flimsy in my opinion. I think that every single snap that sort of stuff happens, so to call it on that one is kind of crazy. Another one with Luke Schoonmaker, his touchdown that got called back should have been a pass interference on Philadelphia. And there was just a couple other ones that, again, I'm not going to complain. I'm not a Dallas Cowboys fan, but if I was a fan of them, I'd be pretty annoyed with those. But in this situation, you have to play through them. And even though Dallas offensively was able to kind of do whatever they wanted against the Philadelphia Eagles outside of the run game, they really were not able to win the game of inches. And ultimately, those inches costed them the game. I'm going to say this now, Dak Prescott has been playing like a top 5 quarterback these past 3 weeks. He's been playing phenomenal, and so does CeeDee Lamb. And I feel like ever since that 49ers game, this offense has really been figuring out their identity. This offense is extremely reliant on CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott just making plays. Now, I do have a video coming out probably tomorrow about the Dallas Cowboys and whether or not they are true contenders or not. So if you want to hear more about my opinions of not only the Dallas Cowboys, but probably a little bit about this Philadelphia Eagles team, go ahead and check out that video. But for both these teams, if we look towards their future, the Dallas Cowboys have a pretty easy schedule these upcoming weeks, whereas Philadelphia has some tough matchups against teams like Kansas City, Buffalo, and the 49ers. So we'll just kind of have to wait and see how the rest of the season plays out. Next, let's talk about the very first game that happened on Sunday. It actually happened in Germany, which I think is awesome. The Miami Dolphins versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, this game can be described as a tale of two halves. At halftime, the score was 21-0 to the Kansas City Chiefs, and ultimately the final score was 14 Miami, 21 Kansas City. And had Miami put together a nice final drive, they could have won this game. Now let's talk about Kansas City first because they are the winners of this game. It has been kind of a weird year for them. Fortunately for them, they've been able to find ways to win these hard games. On the day, Patrick Mahomes was 20 for 30 for 185 yards and 2 touchdowns. Definitely not a vintage Mahomes game, but he did just enough with some of the pieces that they do have to win the game. Now offensively for this game, the Miami Dolphins really had a game plan to slow down Travis Kelce. On the day, Kelce only had 3 catches, and they basically forced these other guys like Sky Moore, Jerick McKinnon, Marquez Valdes-Scantling to really step up, and of course, they really weren't able to do so. A lot of what this Kansas City Chiefs offense is based off of is just how good Patrick Mahomes is. Now, defensively for the Chiefs, they're one of the best units in the entire NFL. Last night, they made Tua look kind of pedestrian. On the day, Tua only had 193 yards and 1 touchdown. So if you're Kansas City, you have to feel very excited about what this defense can become, because right now they're playing like a top 5 unit, and they were able to slow down one of the best players in the entire NFL, in Tyreek Hill. So give your props to Kansas City and this win for them. In the scheme of their division, this game was not like a must-win game, because ultimately that division is pretty bad. But in terms of the conference as a whole, this is a huge win for Kansas City. They now have a stranglehold, kind of like Philadelphia, on that conference. They are in competition with teams like Baltimore for the AFC, but I think with how good Kansas City's defense is looking, I think I'm not too concerned about that. They do have a matchup against Philadelphia next week, and I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I think Philadelphia wins, but we'll get to that at some other point this week. As for the losers of this video, the Miami Dolphins. Miami just cannot seem to find ways to win these tough tough games. First, they lost to Buffalo in a kind of embarrassing fashion. Then they lost to Philadelphia in, again, a kind of weird referee match that didn't really go their way. And here they had a chance to have a fourth quarter comeback against the Kansas City Chiefs, and it didn't happen. It's one of those offenses that when it's explosive and when it's working, it's one of the best in the entire NFL. But when they go up against good defenses that kind of know how to slow down their strengths, it's kind of a weird offense. Now, the good news for Miami is that they have a really easy 5-game stretch coming up. They have the Las Vegas Raiders, the New York Jets, the Washington Commanders, the Tennessee Titans, and then the Jets again. But then yet again, late in the season, they're going to get tested again. They'll have matchups against the Dallas Cowboys, the Baltimore Ravens, and the Buffalo Bills. So I think if Miami can put together a nice 5-game winning streak coming up, and then go into Dallas or wherever that game is going to be played at and win that one, I think that would do a ton of confidence for them moving forward. I do think Miami is still contenders within the AFC because of just how dynamic that team can really be. But until they can beat a top contending team, I can understand why the national media isn't going to give them any credit because they've really beaten up on a bunch of bad teams. Let us now move on to our next big game of the week, which is Baltimore versus Seattle. We're going to kind of talk about this one very fast because it was an absolute demolition of a game. Let's get this out of the way. The biggest winner of the week is arguably the Baltimore Ravens. They just blew out a very good Seahawks team 37-3. And to be honest with you, it's kind of comical how dominant they were. On the day, they had 515 total yards in comparison to the Seattle Seahawks 151. That Baltimore Ravens defense is ridiculously good. They held the Seattle Seahawks to 1 of 12 on third down. They forced 7 punts, and the time of possession battle was 40 minutes Baltimore to less than 20 minutes for Seattle. And this was a game where it wasn't like Lamar Jackson was just smoking them. On the day, Lamar only had 187 passing yards and 0 touchdowns. Sure, Lamar had 60 rushing yards, but it wasn't like a vintage Lamar performance. But he was effective at spots, but their run game led by Keaton Mitchell and Gus Edwards and Justice Hill was super dominant. You heard that right. Keaton Mitchell, Gus Edwards, and Justice Hill were dominant. What a crazy sentence that is. I don't want to go into too much detail because I do have a video planned out for the Baltimore Ravens here in a couple days, so stay tuned to that if you do want to see that one. But the biggest loser of the week, the Seattle Seahawks, man. This was, in my opinion, the dream scenario for the Seattle Seahawks. You were first place in your division, and you had a chance to go out there and beat a super red-hot Baltimore Ravens team to earn some respect, but you got flatlined, straight up embarrassed. And I think it's time we start having a serious conversation about the Seattle Seahawks and their future, because if you look at their current season and how many games they've won and lost and who they've beaten, they haven't really beaten any great teams outside of Detroit, and their 3 losses were to the LA Rams in week 1, the Bengals, and the Ravens. Again, give them flowers and credit for being the Detroit Lions, but the Lions aren't like Super Bowl favorite teams by no means. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, I'm starting to get a little concerned about the Seattle Seahawks and their future. They have a 4-game stretch coming up in about 3 weeks against the 49ers, the Cowboys, the 49ers again, and then the Philadelphia Eagles. And then they're going to have tough matchups against the Titans and the Steelers after that. So if they can't get their act together, they're going to be out of the playoffs. And that would be such a disappointing season after what has looked to be kind of a promising year for them. And going back to this team having to look themselves in the mirror and figuring out what they're going to do in the future, I think a lot of that has to be looked at the quarterback position. Geno Smith has not been bad, but he hasn't really been a top 10 quarterback, which I think the Seahawks team needs. And unfortunately, this team is too good to go out there and potentially get a Caleb Williams or a superstar quarterback in this year's draft without ultimately having to go up and trade up for that draft pick. So a super weird position for the Seattle Seahawks, and let me know in the comments if you guys think they can potentially beat the 49ers, Cowboys, or Eagles. But before we get into our last winners and losers of the week, I did want to throw out a quick little shout out to CJ Stroud. Before this year, I had CJ Stroud as my #1 ranked quarterback in last year's draft, and to be honest with you guys, I did have some doubts about CJ Stroud and his future in the NFL, especially after his week 1 performance in the preseason. But through 9 weeks, he is not only the rookie of the year, he is a genuinely great quarterback. I don't want to overhype this guy because he hasn't really gone up against a great team this year. Outside of going up against the Jaguars and the Ravens, he's faced the Colts, the Steelers, the Falcons, the Saints, the Panthers, and the Buccaneers. I wouldn't say those are necessarily great teams, but regardless of who he's going up against, this is a rookie quarterback who on the season has 2,270 yards, 14 touchdowns, and 1 interception. A rookie quarterback through 9 weeks has 1 interception. Do you guys know how many interceptions Patrick Mahomes has? He has 8. Now, sure, you could say, well, Patrick Mahomes is going up against better competition, and you're definitely right, but still, let's think about that. Rookie CJ Stroud has 1 interception, Patrick Mahomes has 8. You can compare his 1 interception with damn near every quarterback in the NFL. If his team was playing even better, I honestly think this kid would be in the MVP conversation. They have a home run hit with him, and I'm super excited about his future. And before we get into that final matchup, I did also want to give some flowers to the Las Vegas Raiders. I am a Raiders fan, so you guys know I had to give them credit in this 30-6 victory against the New York Giants. Sure, I get it, it's the Giants, they suck, they're one of the worst teams in the entire NFL, but you beat them by 24, and your team finally looked like they actually had energy. So flowers for them, I'm super excited about what this team can be moving forward. Even if it doesn't result into the playoffs or anything like that, I'm just happy that they got rid of Josh McDaniels. But let's move on to our last matchup, which is going to be the Cincinnati Bengals versus the Buffalo Bills. And of course, the winners are going to be the Bengals and the losers are going to be the Bills. After a horrible start to the season, the Cincinnati Bengals now sit at 5-3 and look like one of the best teams in the entire AFC. Joe Burrow is back to playing at an MVP level. On the day, Joe Burrow had 348 yards and 2 touchdowns. And finally, this offense was able to get T. Higgins going. This was T's first game over 100 yards, and he finally was able to look like his true self. Now, whether or not the Cincinnati Bengals team has the current roster to go out there and win a championship is still to be determined, because currently, I don't know if they can go out there and beat a Dallas Cowboys or a Philadelphia Eagles team, but currently they're playing some really good football. This offense can finally start moving the ball down the field efficiently. The run game still is not quite there, and that is definitely something that is a bit alarming. But let's be honest with one another, there's not a lot of teams that really know how to run the ball effectively outside of the Ravens and the Eagles. So I'm not terribly concerned about the run game, but the fact they got Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins going is definitely a nice thing to look forward to. You also can't talk about this Bengals team without talking about how good that defense has been. On the day, they held a really good Josh Allen-led offense to only 18 points, and they forced Josh Allen to be Superman. And I think that's kind of the formula to beat a Buffalo Bills team. To force Josh Allen week in and week out to be kind of like Caleb Williams at USC. I know that's a crazy comparison because the Bills actually have a decent defense, but you get my point. Which can sort of transition us now to the Buffalo Bills side of things. That's the problem with this current Buffalo Bills roster. It's Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs versus the world. This offense doesn't really have a reliable second option. Like, Dalton Kincaid has been a nice addition to this team. On the day, he had 10 catches for 81 yards, but Kincaid hasn't really proven himself to be a Travis Kelce-like player yet, so teams don't really fear him. And unfortunately, right now, their number 2 receiver is Gabe Davis, and he's kind of been ineffective at certain points. The best thing Gabe Davis does is be a deep ball threat guy, and that's kind of it. So in games where Buffalo can't get Josh Allen to that Stephon Diggs connection going, this team really struggles, and that was kind of the example in this game. They were really able to slow down Stephon Diggs in that first half. And what I don't get about Buffalo is the fact that they actually have some really good running backs, but they kind of refuse to use them. Sure, James Cook only had 6 carries for 20 yards, and that's definitely not efficient and clean football, but running back is a position where the more you use it, the better it gets, and that's just something they haven't really done with James Cook. And if you're not going to use James Cook in that way, then use him in ways that allow him to be that dynamic running back that he really is. At the end of the day, they only ran the ball 8 times with their 2 running backs, and that's just not a formula for success. In my opinion, you can pass the ball on first down, run the ball on second down, do something creative on third down. There's so many different ways that you could go about that order, but I think the run game has to be something that they look to establish early on in games. Even if that run game isn't producing these super long rushes, at the bare minimum, it does keep your defense off the field, and it allows Josh Allen to be a little bit more fluid as these safeties start to move up. So moving forward, I do want to see James Cook become a focal point for this offense. And no, I'm not just saying that because he's on my fantasy team, or maybe I am, I don't know, we'll see. But that's all I have for you guys in this video. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Like I said, I have a bunch more content coming out this week regarding this most recent week and kind of the trajectory of where we're going at in the future. So if you do enjoy that type of stuff, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button, as well as share this video to all your friends and family who might enjoy this video as well. But I love you guys. Peace.